My name's Jeanette Butterworth, and I work with Western North Carolina Nonprofit Pathways. Pathways is so excited to offer this webinar today, and the title of it is Sharing Impact in Ways that Generate Income and Interest. And we're here today with Mandy Pierce and Marie Palacios of Funding for Good. And over at Funding for Good, their mission is helping organizations grow for good. And I'm really excited about this topic today because we all know that telling our stories is one of the most helpful and important things that nonprofits can do for their strength and their sustainability. And today's webinar is going to be all about how do we tell the stories of the important work that we're all doing in our communities, and how do we use those stories to help grow our donor base and increase interest and ultimately increase our revenue streams. So I'm excited for y'all to be here today. And also, before we get started, I just want to make sure that everyone knows about Pathways. Do a little plug, because we are a resource that's out here for Western North Carolina nonprofits. We have all kinds of services that we offer: workshops, coachings, all kinds of things that are listed on our website. So go take a look at our website, see if there's anything out there that seems like it would be a good fit for your organization right now, and get in touch with us. Or even if you're struggling with something in your organization that you don't see a match for on our website, get in touch with us. We'd love to talk it through with you and support you along on your journey. And a couple of housekeeping things real quick, and then I'm going to turn it over to Mandy and Marie. If you have technical difficulties, please use that chat function. We will be doing questions and answers as we can. It's a jam-packed hour and a half full of information, but Mandy and Marie will pause and take some questions as we can along the way. After the webinar, we will post a recording of the webinar on our website, along with the slides that come along that you're seeing on your screen today. And we'll also email you a link to that once we get done. Also in that email will be a survey that we would love for you to fill out to let us know how today went for you, and then also let us know about topics that you would like to hear about in the future. So please take a moment. It's a very, very brief survey. It's super helpful to us. So right now I'd like to turn it over to Mandy and Marie. Mandy and Marie are leaders in the nonprofit community in Western North Carolina. They are fabulous fundraisers, and I'm so excited to be here and to learn from both of y'all today. So take it away, Mandy and Marie.
Pierce. For those of you who have not met us before, I'm on the left-hand side of your screen, and I have been in the nonprofit world for about 21 years, and actually got my start in the nonprofit world in Asheville, North Carolina at the American Lung Association when I was in college. So that's where I wrote my first grant. That's where I did my first special event. That's where I learned lots and lots about donors and all sorts of things that have helped me in my nonprofit career. And I'm here today with Marie Palacios, and I'll let her tell you a bit about herself.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be with you today. While Mandy and I have partnered for well over a decade and have clients all over the country, we both call Western North Carolina home, and we have brought millions of dollars into our local communities for different nonprofits, and hope that today's tips will be helpful. We offer two different perspectives. Mandy comes from a little different background. I've spent the majority of my nonprofit professional career as either a program director or as an executive director. So combined, we feel like we're able to offer a little bit bigger picture of each topic, and we hope that you will ask as many questions as you have, and we will be checking in on the chat throughout the webinar today.
Hey, if you have a question, inevitably there's someone else out there that has the same one, so feel free to put it in there, and we'll try to take as many questions as we can. I'm going to let Jeanette kind of pace that however fast or slow she wants to, and then we'll definitely take questions at the end. But today we're here to talk about sharing impact, and there's a lot of different verbiage that gets thrown around in the nonprofit world. You have service and impact and engagement and all these different terms, but we're here to talk about impact today because that's what most donors and foundations and people that are helping support your organization financially are interested in. They want to know what kind of impact you're having. And we define impact as having a strong effect on someone or something. And we're going to talk all about that today. So I hope that you're in the right place, and I hope you're looking forward to it. why is reporting impact so important, beyond the fact that the folks that give us dollars and support want us to report on it? And there's lots of different kinds of impact that you can report on. There's social impact and economic impact, organizational impact, programmatic impact. You know, that list could go on, but why is it important to report that information? And the simple answer is because you have to be able to answer the question, so what? What difference does your program or your project or your organization as a whole make in your community or your county or your region or your state or the country as a whole? If you weren't here tomorrow, would it matter? If your program dried up and went away next week, would anybody miss it? And so it's very important to be able to share about the impact of those pieces of your organization with the people that are supporting it. We have a good friend named Beth Brodowski, and she contributed to our first book and said, people don't want to fund your existence. They want to fund your impact. And that is quite true. People don't want to fund the fact that you need to keep your doors open. People don't want to fund the fact that you exist. They want to know that their dollars are making a difference. And it's not always about the warm fuzzies of philanthropy these days. Sometimes it really is about, what is the return on my investment? Should I give my money to this organization? What am I going to get back for that? What is the community going to get back for that? So I encourage you to keep that in mind as you raise money and talk about the difference that you're making in your community. It's not about you as an organization. It is about the difference that you are making in your community. So I'm going to let Marie talk to you for a few minutes about demonstrating impact and give you some really good examples of this.
All right, so on your screen you see just a sample of a grant called Save Them All, and I believe that one's through Best Friends. Mandy and I have done some work with the Best Friends group at the national level. And some of the prompts in the grants, you all have seen this. Any one of you who have written grants have seen the question that goes like this: what is the direct impact, or what are the measurable impact? What will the measurable impact be for your project? And it may be that they want to see saving lives or leading to a reduction in shelter deaths if you are working with animal welfare groups. If you are working with children, it might be an increase in reading scores or math scores, but something tangible. As Mandy said, sometimes we have those indirect, and today we don't want to take away from the narrative. So we want to help you find a balance between the heartstrings, the stories, the client stories, the stories of success, and the data, and combine the data and those heart stories into impact statements. So we have some clients in town that do an amazing job with this, and one of them is the Greater Hickory Cooperative Christian Ministry, and Mandy does a lot of development work with them. And one of the things that we try to focus on is showing people the power of their dollar. So how many of you as nonprofits go out and you say, oh, we need X number of dollars, and we're raising money for this particular project that's going to cost us $5,000. But not every donor can hand you $5,000. So you want to be able to show the power of the dollar at every level. And this is a really great example of that.
There's an event called Take a Bite Out of Hunger that CCM does every year. I actually just did it 2 weeks ago. And the first time I saw this, it was on a table at a restaurant, and it was the size of a business card. So imagine all this information on the business card, and the left-hand side of your screen, the blue part, that was on one side of the business card. On the other side, much smaller than on your screen, was all the other information. And when I read that initially, I said, I was just going to give them some money, right? I was like, I'll go and, or no, originally I said, I'll go get them some food. So I was like, I'm going to go to Big Lots, or I'm going to go to Aldi's, or I'm going to go to Walmart, somewhere I can get, things for a really good price, and I'm going to take them groceries. And then I read this statement, and it said, through Second Harvest Food Bank, we can turn $5.92 donation into $219.04, and a $4.32 donation into $116.54. And immediately I said, oh my gosh, I have to see how they're doing that. That's crazy. That's way better than what I can do with $10 at Walmart. And then they said a donation of $5.92 allows us to purchase 37 jars of peanut butter. I don't know if you eat peanut butter at your house, but peanut butter is not cheap. I cannot buy 37 jars of peanut butter for $5.92 anywhere. And then a donation of $4.32 allows us to purchase 27 boxes of cereal. Again, cereal, something I don't buy, but I love and eat like a whole box at a time when I do have it. is really expensive. I don't even know if I could buy one box of cereal for $4.32. So it really helped me see the difference that giving them my dollars would make versus going out and buying food for them, right? So you have to figure out, what is it that you do? What do you offer? What impact do you have when you go to share with someone about how you want them to engage? We call that a call to action, right? So if you're giving someone a call to action and you're asking them to give you money, you have to be able to tell them what you're going to do with that. What's the impact, right? Instead of us going out and buying the thing you need or volunteering to do the thing you need. If my money is going to go a lot further, you have to give me something like this, something that tells me the value of that dollar.
And adding on to what Mandy said, is nowhere in there does that say that if you give $5 that they're going to go buy peanut butter with it. This is what we call the skill of being generally specific. You're specific. You're giving exact numbers of what can be purchased, the power of that dollar, but you're not saying when you give us $5, we are going to go buy X number of jars of peanut butter or X boxes of cereal. So one thing of reporting impact is be generally specific, unless you have a specific campaign you're working on and every dollar is going to that. If this is a general ops campaign and you're wanting to get dollars in the door to run your mission, you break down each component of your operations and say how those dollars can contribute. I might give them $5 and they may end up using it to purchase water bottles or something else, but I can feel good knowing that it went further than if I donated something. As an executive director of a small nonprofit, we are constantly putting things on Facebook saying, hi, we need some water hoses for our garden, or we need some cleaning supplies, and we need X, Y, and Z. I'm sure some of you probably put out a call to churches or community organizations or businesses asking for office supplies. And I'm not sure what happens with you, but I know that I tend to get what everyone has when they cleaned out their closet or their kitchen or their office space, and it's just a bunch of odds and ends. It might be in passable condition, but it's not what we would have spent our dollars on. So sharing impact and sharing needs need to be very specific. So if you say, we need a hose, a water hose, great. But if you don't need that and that is not the first thing you need, then say X number of dollars will allow us to do X in our community garden, or X number of dollars will allow us to do this in our tutoring program. And don't just put your physical needs. You do want a needs list of physical needs, but if you are going to be specific and you need a specific type of supply, you don't need to just say paper. You might say copier paper. You might say we need this, and explain how those materials are used to serve the community. So keeping our office functioning allows us to serve X number of clients a day and make sure they have the critical documents and the referrals in writing so that they can go access treatments they need. So go a step beyond just saying you need office supplies. What are those office supplies for in the world of the client? So we are going to look a little bit right now at key components to impact reporting. If we get going a little fast, feel free to put a chat in there and ask for clarification. I'm going to check and see. And let's look at first key components to impact reporting would be, what is the problem? So it might be that there is a high dropout rate in your school system. It might be that there is a kill shelter in your community with animal welfare groups. We tend to use a lot of animal welfare demonstrations since that's a lot of our client base. It might be that there is not access to health care in the rural community. So you want to identify those problems and then address your capacity in helping resolve those problems. And we had a client this morning call us and say, okay, I know that there's a problem and I know that I can help solve the problem, but I have a very short history as a nonprofit. How do I demonstrate that I'm credible, that I can successfully resolve this issue? And it comes down to those community partners. So you see on your slide something about community partners. Who you align yourself with is part of that impact reporting. It's saying these community partners, the YMCA, city government, county government, they believe in what we're doing enough to put their name on our partner list. And if they are backing this, you definitely should be too. So giving credit, sometimes we want to hog all the credit and say we are doing all this by ourselves because we want donors to believe that they need to give to us instead of other places. And in fact, donors are looking for collaboration, not competition. So when they see that you work well with others or play nicely with your community partners, they're going to see that they have greater bang for their buck, and that when they contribute to you, they're impacting the community through many other organizations because you do work well with your community partners. You also need to consider third-party reporting. Who do you need to report to? Are you reporting to a donor, to your stakeholders, to your board of directors? You should be reporting to all of these. Are you reporting to your clients? They should know how the services are going and how they participated and were part of that success or part of that need. So those are things that you need to identify. Who are you reporting to? Because you cannot effectively track data and know what you're reporting unless you know what kind of information your donors or the people you are reporting to require. We've worked with groups that literally track everything down to the paper clips that get donated. And while that's amazing, the manpower that goes into tracking that is very valuable. In North Carolina, a volunteer hour is currently valued at $22.99. So if you are using volunteers, then that volunteer hour is worth $22.99. So being able to say, you know, we can hire someone for $22.99, we can get someone in the door, or your volunteer hours. We had 500 volunteers that believed in our program last year. Their combined work hours equaled this. That also shows that you're having an impact and people believe in your program. Other components for impact reporting: the number of people you're serving, the number engaged, number impacted, the measurable outcomes and demographics. We're going to go through these a little bit more in detail. We're going to move on to the next slide. How are we sounding so far? Is everyone hearing us okay?
So I'm going to take a quick second here. I'm going to go up to the chat box. If you could let me know if everybody is hearing us okay. I can hear you. I can hear you. Yes, I can hear you. Yes. Okay, cool. Just checking in. Thank you.
So we were talking just a little bit about evaluating before you create. There is nothing more challenging than having a grant report due and walking in the door to one of my program staff members or someone in the community that we're working with and saying, okay, we need to report on the impact of this project. How quickly can you get me that data together? And they say, oh, it'll probably take me 3 or 4 weeks. That means that the process hasn't been very well thought out. So prior to a grant, prior to launching a project, when you do your initial project design, there needs to be a component in there that includes what data you're going to track and for what purpose. There's no reason to track data if it's not going to be something you're reporting. But you do want to make sure you are being comprehensive. So it might be the number of clients you serve. It might be gender breakdowns. And so when you're evaluating, these are the questions you want to ask. Who are you reporting to? Is it a donor? Is it a stakeholder? Is it your board of directors? What are you reporting about? When does it have to be tracked? So if you know that you are working with an after-school program and you have to report to the state, but the schools don't report their math scores until after school is out, you need to know that. So you might need another way to track that. I ran an after-school program for over a decade, and one of the requirements for one of our grants was the increase in reading and math scores. But the math scores were not released until after, the typical exams were not released until after the grant reporting period. So we had to say that we would use report cards versus the end of the year exams because we could not access that data. So you need to be sure that you are going to have access to all the data you need. If you are working with school systems, they have a time frame. If you're working with city or county or community partners, don't assume that they are going to be able to provide you the information that you need on the day you need it, especially if you call them a week in advance. In one of the groups we worked with, used to partner with the local health department to do mammograms and health screenings for minority women. The health department was the one collecting and tracking that data. So the community partner that received the dollars had to make sure that they knew when the health department could provide them that data and make sure that they got it in a timely manner. So they used a memorandum of understanding with the community partner to say, we are giving you these dollars we've been gifted through this grant, but we need this data by X date, and this is exactly what we need to track. moving on, reevaluating data that's being collected and make sure that it's all necessary, and think ahead. Sometimes you don't think about it, but if you've ever filled out a United Way grant or some of the local grants, they will ask you very specific questions about the demographics you're serving. So how do you track that? If you're a small organization, you may not be tracking the gender or the ethnicity or the race of every person walking in. So one of the things that you can do as an alternative, hopefully you can track those things if it's relevant to your field of work, but you can also look at your county demographics, and you can say in a grant report, while we do not track the ethnicity or the gender of every single client due to the nature of our work, our clients mirror our local demographics, and the demographics are X, Y, or Z.
We have a great question that just came in. What is the best way to find out what sorts of impact results high-value individual donors would be most interested in supporting? Just ask. So it's just like any other relationship with anybody else. If you want to know what sector, what their must-haves are, or what they're looking for in return for some kind of engagement, just ask them. A lot of times, especially more well-developed individual donors or foundations, they know exactly what it is they want and how they want you to report that to them. They know why they want it. They know how they're going to share it with their board. They know what they're looking for to continue an investment. So the best process is just having an open conversation, which also allows you to build a better relationship with your donors, which is the most important part of all fundraising. Relationship building. Good question. Thank you.
Absolutely. That is an amazing question. If you are working on a state grant, you're going to notice that they give you pre-populated, in many grants, pre-populated goals and objectives. So for example, the TANF grant that used to be for after-school programs would say 70% of all students participating of the total, let's say 70% of X students, and we would have to fill in the blank of 100 students, are going to increase their math scores by blank percent. And the state would actually give us measurable goals and objectives because that's what they wanted to see. Well, most foundations do have things they want to see, but it might not be listed in their guidelines. They might simply ask you, what are the measurable goals and outcomes? And you could get a lot further in that proposal if you picked up the phone and asked. Mandy, through Funding for Good, I believe it was 2 years ago, hosted a grant cycle, and she was going to give dollars to an animal welfare group. We accepted applications, we read through them, and I believe only one person picked up the phone. The application said, if you have any questions, feel free to call. One person picked up the phone to ask this question: what is it that you are passionate about funding, and what would you like to see? And Mandy was able to say, you know what, I'm passionate about all kinds of things, but spay and neuter is not the highest on my list, but X, Y, and Z is. And while the grant said it was an animal welfare grant, and that everyone who applied actually qualified, only one person took the time to figure out what specifically about animal welfare the donor was passionate about. So that's just a word to the wise. They may allow you to populate your own goals and objectives, but they are offering, the donor is offering their money, whether it's a grant or a private donor. They're passionate about something you're doing, and it's valuable to you to pick up the phone or schedule a conversation and say, I feel like our project aligns with your passions and your priorities. I want to make sure that we are reflecting to you how your dollars are being spent. How would you like to see that report look? What are the components you would like to see included in that? So absolutely, don't just fill out a grant application or use just, an Excel spreadsheet and track it. Ask the donors. So a lot of people have problems with these three components, and that's service versus engagement versus impact. And they're really three different things. A lot of organizations will say, oh, Marie, we're so small. We do 30 backpacks. We had a group that did 30 backpacks. And this is the group we serve. And I say, okay, so who do you serve? We serve 30 students through the backpack program. Okay, but who do you impact? Well, the children's families are being impacted because that's fewer dollars that their parents are spending on food because the children are getting things over the weekend. But then what is the greater impact? And almost every food disparity group that we've worked with will say the kids weren't hungry. And I would say, take it a step further. Do the research and say, what is it about hunger that impacts children's learning, that impacts their mental health, their physical health, their emotional health? And we were able to say that children who are hungry perform at X% less of a rate in the classroom. If they are not hungry, they perform at a higher rate. So when you're looking at your impact, don't just say we served X number of people. This is the product we provided. go beyond that and think, what impact did that service have? Not just we gave food to a child. If you were working with domestic violence victims, let's just say, well, I used to offer drug and alcohol rehab classes through a Latino center that I worked with, and people would say, how many clients did you serve? Well, I could look at that and say we had 35 men come through the program to receive programming to reduce domestic violence incidences, and they were sent to us through the courts. Well, we served those 35 men, but who was impacted? When we did the intake, we would ask how many of them had spouses or partners, how many of them had children, how many people lived in their home, how many of them were employed. And we could actually break down the impact and say, while we served these 34 men, there were approximately 98 children that are impacted because their father or that parent figure is getting mental health services and support. Maybe their employer is able to say they're more consistent at work. Maybe they're, you know, because they're getting that support, their mental health, they're not spending as many dollars on coping mechanisms. And we actually had clients track the behavioral changes. So it's more about looking at the impact of the service, not we served them, but we saw these behavioral changes. We saw this impact in their family. So service is who you delivered the program to. Engagement is an interaction or an introduction. So if you are setting up a fair at a community event and you have one of those booths, a lot of times we will see on people's impact report that they served 5,000 people on that day. Unless you delivered a program to 5,000 people, you did not serve 5,000 people, you engaged them. That is a big difference. I carry a clicker to all of my events, and the only time I count someone as engaged is if I actually stopped, got their attention, even if it were 2 seconds, and shared an information about my organization, gave them a marketing materials, shared upcoming events. If I engage them, I click, and I count all of those engagements at the end of every outreach event, so that next year when people call and say we want you to attend, I can see which events allowed our nonprofit to best engage the community. Because if I'm wanting to create impact, I have to use staff and volunteer time wisely, so only participating in those events that promote engagement of the greater community is the best use of that time. And then impact, having a strong effect on something or someone, we just talked a little bit about that. What is the impact? So I challenge you to stop and think of every program you offer. If it's food, what is the necessity of food? Not just to fill your belly. If it's academics, what trends go along with academics? If you provide childcare and after-school programming, when the state asked us to provide after-school programming for high-risk children, people thought, oh, that's from the lower-income neighborhoods, that's a socioeconomic status. No, according to juvenile justice, any child left unattended is high risk. So all of those third graders, fourth graders, fifth graders, sixth graders getting off the bus and watching TV or hanging out at home until the parents got home at 5:30, all of them were labeled as high risk according to the government grants, because truancy, the most truancy was happening according to studies in the after school hours when parents were not home from work yet. So the impact of that program wasn't just that you provided a safe place, but that perhaps you reduce truant behavior. So look at the impact beyond just the number of people serving. That's the message of the day.
So as you think about the things that you want to track and share in your impact reporting, you have to think about the things that you can actually measure as well. So there's always the warm fuzzy stuff, which we call qualitative data, but then there is quantitative data, and those are the things that you can assign numbers to, metrics, things you can measure. So things you can measure is the number of people that you've served, like Marie just said, or engaged or impacted. Those are 3 different metrics. The number of visits maybe that someone has had to your organization, the number of contact hours. So maybe your program offers 10 contact hours a week, right? You can measure that. The demographic breakdown of who you're serving, and that can be any kind of demographic, from religion to gender to race to age, where they live in your community, what their income level is. There's all kinds of different demographics depending on what you do, what you have access to track, and what is relevant for you to track. Program results, what can you measure there? So is that an increase in knowledge or awareness? And how do you measure that? Are you doing pre and post testing? What kind of evaluation methods do you have? Do you notice a change in behavior? Maybe you are partnering with a school system and you can find out, if a kid was having behavior issues at school. Had they been in-school suspension or out-of-school suspension or absent from school, and how has that behavior changed since they've been in your program? Are you able to get that information? And then achievements of specific goals, whether it's graduation of a program, not having an out-of-school suspension for a semester, whether it's getting a job and maintaining it for a certain number of months, whether it, whatever it is that your organization is hoping to accomplish through your programs, what are the systems you have in place to actually track and measure that information? I'm going to check the questions box real quick. Looks like we have one. Okay. What is the best way to find out what sorts of impacts? We read that one. The slides of recordings today will be available. Okay, just checking to see if there were any questions. All right, I'm gonna let Marie talk to you about a little bit of all the different types of impact reporting that exist. And there's a couple of free tools out there. I think everything probably these days has a paid version you can upgrade to, but I know that you can get some free processes for creating a pictochart or a pictograph. So if you go to those websites, and I think it's PIKTO, pictograph and pictochart, I think you can create some free infographics for your organization. I'm actually doing this with 2 of my clients right now to share this kind of information. So I'm gonna let Marie talk to you a little bit about this because she does this with her organization right now as well.
All right, so you see a sample on here, and we're not saying just because there's samples on here does not mean that we are advocating and saying this is the best way or the only way to do it. These are just some visuals, and hopefully you can look at them and say, okay, I like this, I don't like this, and use them as a starting point. But here you see visuals for incoming animals, 9,279, and outgoing, 6,103, and you can kind of compare what's happening, how many are surrendered, how many are transferred, how many are strays, and you can get all the data you need in this little packet. So the question is, what would you do with this information? This might be something that gets put on a bookmark, and it might end up, in your local library. It might be something you do in partnership with another community group if they're doing a literacy program. It might be something you give out in the front of your office. It might be something you put in a newsletter. There are lots of different ways to report your impact. So this is one example, and I'm going to move on to another one. Well, if this slide will move. There we go. All right, so the next one, this is a little bit different color scheme, a little bit different way of doing it. And one of the things we really like about this is they give you a visual. You can see the gallons of water, the bales of hay, and the pounds of pellet, and it gives you a very visual way of seeing the impact. You see 40 volunteers. That's impressive, but the question is, how many hours are those giving? So I like to take the volunteerism a little bit further and say, we have 40 volunteers on a regular basis, or we've had 40 volunteers over the course of the year who have donated X total number of hours, and each of those hours is worth $22.99 for a total value of X number of dollars, which means that filled 3 full-time positions. Our volunteers basically completed the work that 3 full-time employees would have had to do. So that's another way to take it, because I could see 40 volunteers. That doesn't impress me as much because they could have all worked for one event and then never appeared again. So 40 regular volunteers, 40 event volunteers, take that a step further. And then veterinary and hospital volunteered hours, there's some things down there, volunteer board members, things like that. Some people want to see the diversity on your board. So maybe having from different geographic regions, different professions, different backgrounds, ethnicities, you've got different perspectives depending on the type of work you do. So you might share a little bit more about that. So hopefully this is a little bit of information for you that's helpful. I like both of these because, like I said, they can be used on a book card or rack card. There's something that you can give out, and they get dated each year, so you don't want to spend tons and tons of money on something and then having to throw extra bulk away. So these are things you can print out and use in more functional ways.
You can also create JPEGs of these and put them on your website. You can use them in social media. You can take elements of them out and use them in social media when you're trying to raise awareness about a particular program, project, or need. Some of my clients in the past have taken this kind of information and blown it up. So you might have like a 4 or 5 foot banner created that you can put in your program area, in your lobby, you know, somewhere that's a high traffic area, and you might spend $60 or $70 on that once a year, but people can look at this and get a really good idea of the impact that your organization's having. So you can go and Google search sample infographics for nonprofits, and you will get tons and tons and tons of these that come up. So there's no limit to what you can do. And, you know, most people today have an attention span of a gnat on crack. So, you know, if you give them colorful pictures and short phrases to read, they're more likely to look at that and stay engaged. So hopefully that gives you some ideas about new things you can do to share with your donors.
And a little shout out to Western North Carolina Pathways. I participated in the Board Ready Burke program. So Jeanette was part of making that happen for Burke County and made some great contacts. And one of our organizations, a mission here in town, does some amazing work. And through Board Ready Burke, I was able to hear some of the impact that they have. Now, mind you, I'm not on the street all the time looking for the impact of this particular mission, but my engagement in Board Ready Burke through the Pathways allowed me to meet the director of the mission and make a contact. So I started donating all of my extra items and things that I would normally take over to the Goodwill. I started taking over to the mission because I had formed that personal relationship. The thing that I did not see when I dropped things off was an impact statement. So I mentioned when I went by a few weeks ago, I said, you know, all of that amazing information could have been put on a weather-resistant sign or right there at the drop-off point to say, here's your impact, and then maybe a needs list of, as you're thinking about donations, these are the top items we still need. So impact is about sharing two different things: what you have done to change the community and what other people can do to help you change the community. So we have to stop thinking about impact saying we did all of this on our own and inviting people to be a part of that change. So my recommendation for some of the missions was, if you were looking for contributions, if you don't want, you know, they say some men's trash is another man's treasures. If you don't want people's trash, tell them what you consider to be a treasure. Be specific, and then say your donation of XYZ will allow us to do this. So hanging these posters up, like Mandy said, at drop-off points, especially if you receive material donations with your nonprofit, make sure you have them visible, and then you can have a little slide or a little slot that people can take those. I found that if I try to give them to them, people are too polite to turn them down, so they will take them and then they end up in the trash. But by having a little kind of hanging cart next to one on the wall, people can take them if they're truly interested, and I know that my marketing materials are ending up in the hands of people who really want to read them.
I'm not sure if anybody has heard of the organization Charity Water. Probably you have, but they have really great marketing tools. They have a really great website. I've been very impressed with them over the course of time. And Marie and I really just pulled this right off of their website, but it's how they're sharing about their impact. So we just took one of the categories that they focus on, which is health, and we pulled out the statements that they're using. So diseases from dirty water kill more people every year than all forms of violence, including war, which is kind of staggering, right? When you share impact with an organization or an individual, what you are probably looking for more often than not is a wow, or really, or I didn't know that kind of response. So if you're not getting that kind of response from, you know, like 8 out of 10 people you're sharing it with, you might not be choosing the right information to share. 43% of those deaths are children under 5 years old. Access to clean water and basic sanitation can save around 16,000 lives every week, which for those of us here in the United States, more often than not, that's kind of like, oh my God, I had no idea, right? So how do they tackle the water crisis? This is telling you what they're doing to help resolve the issue that they have created this organization to address. We work with local experts and community members to find the best sustainable solution in each place where we work, whether it's a well, a pipe system, a biosand filter, or a system for harvesting rainwater. Now, with that statement, they're not saying this is the one thing we do everywhere we go, and we're expecting this to be a cure-all for every organization in the world, right? They're saying we are working with local communities. We're partnering with the people that have boots on the ground that are working in the area, and we're saying, what is the best solution for you, right? With every water point we fund, our partners coordinate sanitation and hygiene training and establish a local water committee to help keep water flowing for years to come. So even though we just do this thing once, even though we fund a water point, this is what's happening in the community to make sure that it stays around. This is how committed the community is to making sure this is successful. This is who's involved. This is who we're partnering with. So this is the kind of information that you're going to want to cultivate if you haven't already, and you probably have a lot of this information. You probably just haven't thought about sharing it in this way. But take each one of the areas of interest for your organization. Maybe you work with dental care for folks that don't have health insurance, and you have a medical clinic and a pharmacy, and you help distribute clothing, and you have a food pantry. Maybe those are your 5 areas of interest, right? So create these types of statements for each one of those areas so it becomes really easy for you to share about what you're doing, who you're partnering with to do it, and the impact that you're having in those particular areas. These are actual grants that we have written over the course of time, and we just pulled some samples out of them to share with you how we write impact into grants, because we've been talking about how do you share impact with donors. That could be one-on-one, it could be a conversation, it could be on your social media, it could be in an annual report, but this is in grants. Because a lot of people are writing grants and doing fundraising, and they don't know how to share this information appropriately in a grant type proposal. So we worked with an organization that did street dog rescues, which is actually, if you've ever been to our website at Funding for Good, both of my dogs are on there, Leo and Dally. And Dally came from the street dog rescue in Dallas, Texas. And they told me $500 would fund 5 spay surgeries. In our experience, a female street dog has 2 litters of approximately 6 puppies twice a year, which means she has 96 puppies over her lifetime. Thanks to this grant, 480 puppies will not be facing life on the street, and this number does not include the offspring of those puppies. Now, Marie shared with you that I funded this grant cycle. And the thing she also said was that I wasn't interested in funding spay-neuter. However, when I, as a funder, became educated on what my dollars would do in the relationship to spay-neuter services, I changed my mind. And this is what I ended up funding. Because I didn't know, I was passionate about animal welfare, still am, but I didn't know this information because I don't work in animal welfare every day. It's very possible that some of the foundations approach are interested in a particular topic, but they may not know as much about it as you do if it's your field, right? So share information that helps them see the impact of their dollars. Bridging the Gap is currently the only after-school program in the county that exists specifically to serve the 1,150 Hispanic students enrolled in our schools. So that's just an impact statement. It was a fact at the time. Obviously, that number is not accurate anymore, but that was an impact statement that we used in lots and lots of grants. Last year, elementary students in the Opening Doors program achieved an average increase of 10.53 points in reading skills and 8.35 points in math skills among students tracked. That's over a letter grade in a year as a result of being in a program, an after-school program. So that's an impact. So what are the things that you can say that you know, that you're not making up or guessing about, that are measurable? Okay, I encourage you to make sure that you're using SMART impact statements. So that means they're specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. That they have a timeline, so we did this last year, or we've done this in the 5 years we've existed. That you can measure them. You're not making up numbers like 10 people felt great after they finished our program, right? You can't measure somebody feeling great. So what are those things that you have that you can share as examples in grant proposals?
And we are not going to go into a lot of logic models and too many of those things today, but we will talk a little bit about outcomes versus impact. A lot of people confuse the two. So we see grant proposals, a lot of people we work with, they say, oh, we want to create brochures for teen pregnancy prevention, and the outcome or the impact is going to be we print 500 brochures educating youth about the risks of teenage pregnancy. That is not an impact, that is an outcome, because that's the product being produced. But if those 500 brochures end up in my closet at my office and never get into the hands of at-risk youth, there was no impact created. So you have to take that a step farther and say, if you are requesting funds for a specific product, what will that product, how will that product be used to create a change in behavior or attitude? As Mandy said, her attitude was changed about spay and neuter because someone educated her. Many of the people I worked with and continue to work with the Latino population in the community, and I was always looking for money for after-school programs. And people would say, well, why are you specifying Latino? And I would say, well, it's really English as a second language. We did not discriminate. The program was open to all people, but our program was bilingual because according to our ESL studies in the community, children who were limited English proficiency or English as a second language took on average 7 years to reach their maximum grade level potential. So I have a child, she is English as a second language. My stepdaughter spent the first few years of her life only speaking Spanish. Highly intelligent. If you speak to her in English and Spanish, she can talk in both, but she is delayed in her classes, not necessarily because she has a learning deficit, but because of the language issue. So we had to start educating our community members about these are smart children, but because their brain is working with 2 different languages and the language acquisition process, they are at risk for taking 7 years to reach their maximum potential. And studies show that if a child is not reading fluently by the 3rd grade, they're like 50%, don't quote me on that, but it was at the time I did the grant, 50% more likely to drop out prior to high school graduation or prior to achieving post-secondary education. That data is probably changed since I did my research. But regardless, early childhood education and addressing English as a second language, regardless of the source language, became a champion cause in our community because people said, wow, this isn't just after school, this is making sure these children know how to read, this is affecting graduation rates and eventually the workforce in our community. So we were able to take the need for early childhood and elementary education and show how that could affect the community later on. Because if we have 1,150 Hispanic children in our community labeled as English as a second language, and they are not getting help at the early levels, that's less than, that's 1,000 people later that probably are not going to be contributing to a post-secondary program or being a part of that or graduating at any level. So huge impact. It's hard sometimes to reflect long-term impact. So you're not going to be necessarily tracking all of your clients for the next 10 years. If you do, kudos to you. For those of us who do not have the capacity to do that, then understanding how the solutions we provide impact a person's life through evidence-based research. I just gave you an example. I cannot tell you exactly where every single one of those children are. I am having coffee with one of my students from 10 years ago today, so I will get to find that out, but I don't have access to all several hundred that I served in the years in that position. So I can take the evidence and the studies that have been proven and say our programs potentially created this impact because this is how providing these services and getting them up to reading level by 3rd grade impact a child. So if you don't track the data, look at the studies. Evidence-based studies, reputable sources are great ways to add a kind of a boost to the programs you're doing and to really confirm to your donors why it's important.
There's a lot of different ways to share impact, and one of the things that is important in the world of development is to make sure you have enough donor touches every year. And I know that most people have heard this before, but you want to have at least 7 donor touches every year, which means you could send a birthday card. You could call and thank someone for their gift. You could write a handwritten thank you note. You could invite someone to an event. You could make an ask. You could include them in an e-blast for a newsletter. They could get an anniversary card for when they became a part of your donor community. There's lots and lots and lots of different ways that you can engage with donors, and you need to be doing that at least 7 times throughout the year, and they don't all need to be an ask. So some of the things that you're going to do throughout the year can be your donor touches, and in those things you're going to share your impact. One thing that we've always done, Maria and I both, is we don't like the term annual report, right? It's kind of boring and nobody wants to read an annual report. However, if you send me a generosity report or an impact report, I'm more inclined to want to look at that because I want to know what kind of impact you've made in the community this year. So as you create this, maybe you share your impact report with major donors in person. Maybe you set up a time and you take that in hand, deliver it to them, and walk them through it and see what all you've done. Maybe you mail that to some donors. Maybe you send that in an e-blast or make it as a part of your newsletter, right? So there's lots and lots of different ways to share your impact as a whole, like as a report. But the other thing you can do is mission moments. Maybe you do mission moments at board meetings or staff meetings, or when you go to do public presentations. So that could be a presentation to a church or Kiwanis Club or United Way or whatever. When you bring someone, you can do it yourself, or you can bring an actual participant from your organization that has experienced the impact and have them share that. So it's a mission moment. Wow factor stats, like the ones that we just shared from Charity Water. You know, what are your wow factor stats? Do you know them? Because what happens a lot of times is when we start working with an organization, it's because we've seen or heard one of those wow factor stats. We're like, oh my gosh, I want to work with that organization. And then we kind of become immune to it because we start working in it and we're like, yeah, you know, this many people are homeless every week here in this area, or this many people go without a meal, or this many kids go hungry every weekend. Like, we become immune to it because we're working in it. But for those people that are not inundated with it every day, it's still a wow factor. It's still something that a lot of people don't know. So being able to share that and recognize it and continue to develop those and help them evolve to help your organization is very important. The power of your dollar. That's one we first shared from CCM at the beginning of the slide. You know, what is the power of the dollar for your organization? How much does it cost to provide one meal? I was just at the soup kitchen here yesterday, and I saw something on the wall that says, for $50, you can feed a family of 4 for a week. So that is one of their value of the dollar at their organization, right? That's pretty amazing. Most people have no idea. They're like, oh my gosh, there's no way I can feed myself on $50 for a week, much less a family of 4, but it is possible. Press releases, human interest stories, and radio, great way to get your impact out. Don't expect that they're going to always come to you. You have to do some of that solicitation and call them. And sometimes you actually have to write the story for them, send it to them. So it says what you want it to say, how you want it to say, how you want them to say it. And because honestly, it just reduces the work for them and they're more inclined to run it. Newsletters, direct mail, and generosity reports. Those are all things you're going to do in-house. Grants, narratives. So if you're putting grant applications together and that's something you're working on, supplemental information. So that could be a trifold brochure or a business card sized document that you can hand to people to share your impact. Or that could be a printed flyer or a brochure. Social media, whatever kind of social media you're working with, whether it's Facebook or website or Instagram or whatever other forms of media are out there right now. And then in-person and verbal. 71% of all giving to nonprofits these days comes from individuals, which means 71% of your development time should be spent cultivating individual relationships. Individual donors can become lifetime donors. Grants, probably not so much. Special events, probably not so much. But you can cultivate an individual donor. They can invite their families, their friends to give. They can become volunteers. They can leave you in their planned giving. So there's lots and lots of ways to engage an individual donor. Make sure that you're spending an appropriate amount of time doing that as an organization.
Mandy and I just released a blog recently, and it included some data from one of the most comprehensive impact reports on millennials and their trends for giving. And I believe it was in 73% of millennials state that they are happy to give to an organization if they have a relationship with the organization, which seems strange because we're thinking millennials are going to do everything through social media and we're not going to, you know, we can reach them through a Facebook launch or we can reach them through something else. But millennials want to feel connected to the cause, and we have to come up with new ways to do that. All donors, I think, regardless of which generation they're part of, want to feel connected to the cause. The information Mandy just shared, do we have a question?
Actually, yeah, let me ask this question for Craig real quick. How do you handle donors who ask to be contacted only once a year? Pausing right there, I say you only ask them once a year. I have some I no longer give to because they did not honor my request to be asked only once a year. Well, that's perfectly acceptable. For some organizations, they haven't really grasped that, how to manage that, because they may not have all the systems in place that other organizations have. They may not have, you know, all the donor software. They may not have the ability to flag you and filter you as only send this request this time of year. Really small one-shop offices, sometimes it's very hard. What they should do is make a special note and take call, like, you know, make that a priority, because not very many people say that. Most people say, I'm going to give it to you once a year and you don't need to call me or email me or meet with me or whatever. And most people are okay with that. But to, you know, it's perfectly acceptable as a donor to not give for any reason or to give for any reason. So if that's the reason you chose not to give, that's fine. But, you know, just coming from some small shops in the past, that's probably the reason why it happened. Not to say that that's an excuse, but that's probably, it's not because they're trying to make you mad or because they don't respect your wishes. It's probably just because they're overwhelmed and they don't know how to do it. Because I don't know many organizations that have a little more system, they have more systems in place that would make that mistake, especially if it was going to cause them to lose a donor. But that's the short answer.
Coming from an executive director who had to come into an organization as the first executive director and transition all of our donor software, glitches occur. I had a donor / someone on my mailing list that kindly emailed when I first came on board and said, you know, I'm recently divorced. My husband was the one that was interested in your nonprofit. I enjoy seeing y'all's stuff, but my mailbox is full all the time and I'd rather not receive any hard copies of anything. Could you please take me off your hard copy mailing list? You can keep me on your email list. So I promptly took care of that. But we had to transfer our donor system over, and everything in the shadows and all of these other things, whoever transferred it transferred the original list, and some of the most recent modifications were not included. So the same lady ended up reaching out to me again and saying, please take me off your list. And I had to apologize and say, I'm sorry, we just upgraded our system. This was a glitch. But as Mandy said, a lot of times groups are working with Blackbaud or GiftWorks, and they're excited about using a new system but don't know exactly how to put those measures in place. And when they run their mailing list, everyone comes up, even if there's a flag beside them. So that's an education. And if you are giving, maybe you could say, I would like to give for you, but this is going to be a capacity building donation to help you with your donor software or your donor development. And you could give for a specific purpose if it's something you're passionate about. Mandy's list right there, I'm going to go back to it really quickly, if I can. Hold on one second. Tools for sharing impact. This is a really, really great way to get your board involved. I work with boards of directors all the time, and most of them do not want to make an ask. I don't know how many times I stand up and say, okay, the board, one of the duties of the board is to make sure the organization has the resources it needs to accomplish the mission. So whether that's dollars or in space and kind materials, it's the board's job. They have 3 fiduciary duties. That's another workshop. But one of the major roles of the board is to make sure the organization has the resources it needs to survive. One of the ways to capture donors is to show impact. I was recently in a board meeting and we were talking about the fundraising process, and 3 members of the board promptly, and they were executive members, raised their hand and said, I will do anything you ask for an event. I will greet people. I will fill out membership cards, but I will not fundraise. And they said, I will write notes. I will do calls. I will not ask for money. And I said, okay, first of all, let's define fundraising. You just said that you would write thank you cards. That's part of the fundraising process. You just said that you would help members fill out membership applications. That's part of the fundraising initiative. And that you would share and maybe do a presentation at the Rotary Club. That is part of the fundraising process. Everything we do is about cultivating relationships and sharing impact. Not a single board member had a problem when I asked them to call and thank someone or to share something amazing our group had done. So we asked staff at different groups we work with to create some of their most wow factor impact statements, like we served 90 kids this week and offered a total number of 500 contact hours for tutoring. So don't just say we served 12 kids. How many contact hours? And give them that wow factor, and encourage board members when they make a call to include one of those. So give them 5 or 6 and say, you know what, we want to thank you for your contribution. And just so you know, $40 allows us to cover the cost of tutoring one child for an entire month. And we offer 12 hours a week, which equals X number of hours a month. Amazing return on the investment. And your membership of $40 made that possible. So thank you. Now, we're not saying that that donor's $40 specifically went to that particular child or that particular cause, but that's the power of the dollar. So it's not false advertising. If you tell someone you're going to use their dollars for something, absolutely you are obligated to respect that and restrict those dollars. But in impact reporting, you were showing the impact. I asked board members to prospect. This is a fun activity you can do with your board. At a board meeting, share a couple wow factors. You might have a program director stand up and share their top 3 wow factors. You might have your executive director stand up and share the top 2 wow factors of the accomplishments that month. It might be that you just got a capacity building grant that's going to allow you to do X, Y, or Z. Then ask the board to prospect and write down all the different ways they could be a part of sharing that impact. So they're not having to go and ask for dollars. They're going to go and share that impact. And put it on a whiteboard, put it on some newsprint on the wall, and just take 5 minutes to brainstorm and say, where can we share the impact? We're not asking you to make an ask. We're asking you to share impact. Most of your board members will be involved in some kind of faith group or a civic group. They might be able to say, you know what, our mission is faith-based. I can do a moment of missions in my church. Another might say, I'm the president of the Keat Club or the Lions or Kiwanis or something like that, and I can share that there. Or I'm going to the local visitor center in the Chamber of Commerce, and I could print some of this stuff out, or I can take our marketing materials and share it there. Or my cousin owns a restaurant down the road. I could turn these into bookmarks, or we can post them on the tables at the restaurant. You don't know the contacts your board members have. I'm going to challenge you today to think outside of the box, because coming from an executive director of a small organization where our marketing budget is almost non-existent, free advertisement, free marketing is like gold to all of us. So when I look at the cost of printing brochures, I know that it costs me approximately $1 to $1.20 every time I send out a mailing to each of my clients or donors or mailing base. But if I have board members go out and share, and they're donating their time and volunteer time to do that, I can reach hundreds of people that maybe never heard of our organization. They're not on our mailing list, just through the power of those connections. So a board activity is prospecting for sharing impact. That's a great way for you to involve your board in this process, and it's fun. So we have a free tool for you today, and you can log into fundingforgood.org/donor impact exercise. It's a little bit longer. We're not going to go into every single thing on sharing the different ways of impact today in this slide, because we have a limited amount of time. So these give you some tips, some logic models, some exercises you can do. It's in a Word document. Everything we offer under our free stuff is in a Word document. It's something you can adapt and change and make your own. We encourage you to do that. So go into that link right there and access that free exercise, or check out any of the other free ones that you might find helpful.
As I mentioned earlier, you want to make sure that pretty much everything you do is SMART. So specific, measurable, attainable, realistic or relevant, and timely. And you want to do your call to actions the same way. You know, if you're asking someone to volunteer with you, you want to tell them how, where, when, for how long, and how to access that opportunity, right? If you want someone to give, you can't just leave it open-ended and say, hey, give to us sometime. You have to say, we're trying to reach this goal by this time, or we have this campaign going until now, or give to us online through Facebook, or text us, or, you know, our website or whatever. So make sure that you are telling people what you want them to do, how to do it, when to do it, where to do it. I don't know if any of you have ever been in the same position, but sometimes organizations will have tickets for sale, whether it's for a barbecue fundraiser or to participate in an event that's coming up or whatever, but then you have no idea how to get the tickets. Like, where do I go to get the tickets? Are they online? One of my nonprofit friends the other day had people that kept coming to them at their organization for tickets, and they didn't have any. They're like, you have to buy them online. Like, we don't have tickets here for you. You have to purchase them online, or wait till the event and buy them at the door. So, you know, being able to let people know what it is you want them to do and how you want them to do it is going to be very important. And then following up with prospective donors is really important. It doesn't matter whether they've said they're going to give, whether they've said just follow back up with us, whether they've kind of brushed you off and said, yeah, reach back out to me in 3 months or whatever. You have to do that. So as a development person, as an executive director who wears all hats, including development, you know, whatever that happens to look like, you have to follow up with people, which means you have to be organized. You have to keep some notes and some calendars for yourself. So finding out from them after they've given a little bit more information is also really helpful. What inspired their gift? Was it a personal connection? Was it the person that asked? Was it how they were asked? Maybe they got an email, maybe they got a text message, maybe they got an individual one-on-one ask. Was it when they were asked? Maybe they were asked at, you know, the beginning of the year after they got Christmas money. Maybe they were asked after they filed their taxes and they got a tax return and they had money. Maybe they said no because they were asked before they had to file their taxes and they didn't know if they were going to get any money back. You know, was it the cause? Do they have a connection? Or was it something else? Most of the time people give when they have three things: when they have a connection, when they have the capacity, and when they're asked in a way that is meaningful to them. So what impeded their gift is kind of the same thing. Did they lack clarity in the ask? Maybe they didn't understand what you were asking for, or how it was going to be used, or when you needed the money. Was it who asked? You know, I'm just being in the nonprofit world, that is such a real thing. You could maybe not like someone as much as someone else and they ask you for the money and you say no. Or maybe you had a relationship with the previous person that asked, they're no longer with the organization, so you're not going to give anymore. And as a nonprofit staff person, you have to realize that that is a real thing. There are organizations I don't give to anymore because the person that I had a connection with isn't there anymore. Marie is a prime example. There's a place she used to be executive director of, and I gave, not because I didn't think the mission was good, but I gave because she's the one that asked. She's not there anymore. Now, mind you, they aren't asking me anymore, but if they did, I probably wouldn't say yes, just because she's the one that asked, right? Was it how they were asked? Maybe they didn't want to respond to the email. Maybe they didn't even read the email. Was it when they were asked? Was it because of the cause, or was it something else? You need to know that information, because if I'm a donor for you for 5 years and I suddenly stop giving, you want to know, why was I giving and what changed, right? Was I giving because I was best friends with the development director? Was I giving because I used to be on the board? What was the reason that I gave?
That is a really, really good point. And once again, another executive director side note. When I started with the new organization, it had been run by a group of strong board members for multiple years. And the chair at the time was a guru in fundraising, very well-respected community member. And I made a point to go through our donor list and call literally every member and every donor within my first few months on staff. And I asked that specific question. I see that you've given in the past X number of dollars, and being specific shows them that you are organized, by the way. So if you can pull up their donor profile and say, we've noticed that you've given an average of $100 a year since 2009 and have contributed X number of dollars in these years. Thank you so much. I just wanted to know, what is it that inspires you to give? I found out in my first few months that a chunk, I'm talking at least 20% of our donors, gave because of the person who had asked, and that person was moving on to another project. And they literally said these words: I gave because so-and-so asked me. This person is now participating in another project, and I will be supporting that project because we go back a long way. Very good to know. But I had to report that to the board and say, look, we have a dent of 20% in our major dollars that we're going to have to overcome. And the other thing is, some people gave because we were new, and now we're not new, so they might not give. Others gave because their parents, I have one that said, because my parents were passionate about your cause, but my dad just passed away, I probably won't be giving next year. So these donor conversations are really important. Another way to engage your board. We have a lot of programs on building A-list boards and getting board engagement, because that seems to be one of the biggest struggles for nonprofits. But when you have board members call and make we're not going to say an ask, because we're not asking, we're thanking. We're saying, hey, thank you for your gift. It allowed us to do this. Do you mind me asking why it is you gave? And they can track that. So that's another way for the board to hear why people are giving, so that when they go out and do make an ask, they know what inspires people to give. So if a board member's never heard why someone gave, they won't know how to kind of do that pitch when they have to actually make an ask.
So we've covered a lot of information in a short period of time. Does anybody have a question about anything we have covered or anything we haven't covered as it relates to sharing impact that you'd like to ask? Because we have time for Q&A right now if there's anything else that you would like to ask us about. We will give you
2 or 3 minutes just to type in your questions.
This is Jeanette. I have a question while we're paused here for a second.
Sure.
I'm curious, how do y'all talk to organizations about overhead, about fundraising for staff costs and building costs and all of those costs that are not program costs? How do you talk to organizations?
We actually have a whole webinar we teach on that, how to fully fund your overhead. Basically, the super general answer for that is make sure that you're distributing your general operating costs to programs and projects as it's appropriate. If 10% of your executive director's time is spent on your after-school program, 10% of that salary should show up in the program budget for that as an expense. So when you do that, you really cover a majority of your expenses. It doesn't matter what it is. It can be rent or utilities or pens and pencils. It doesn't matter. If a portion of it's being used for a particular program or project, it should be allocated in that budget.
Mm-hmm. Great. And I think a lot of the tools that you've shown us today with how to communicate impact, help with individual donor development, which is also a wonderful way, to fund overhead, because those dollars are mostly unrestricted when they come in.
Right. Absolutely. Good question.
Let's check online.
We do have 2 questions in the queue.
Great. Okay. We'd like to hear more about board engagement strategies for our organization. So I'm guessing that's directed at Jeanette, so you can offer additional information on that in the future, or is that for this?
I can answer from Pathways perspective about resources that we have
Sure.
with board engagement. There are a series of Duke classes that are out there that come around in the fall, and always there is once a year a great class on fundamentals for board engagement. So that's not the specific strategies, but that's where you can go to learn from an expert about those. And if you haven't already, if you sign up for our email list, you'll receive information about when those classes come around. And then the other piece that Pathways has to offer for organizations that are larger organizations that have been around for a little while, not for brand new organizations, but we do have a training that we can offer on board engagement. And there's information about that on our website.
And so there's a bunch of free resources on Funding for Good's website as well. We have vlogs, videos that we've done, and there's a whole series on board engagement. And then there's 20 videos on how to grow your donor base in 20 days. We also have a section of blogs of articles that we've written about how all different kinds of fundraising things, but there's a search tool and you can search for all the ones related to board development. And there's also a free stuff tab on our website where you can download Word documents about board engagement and board development. So hopefully between Pathways and that, you'll get a lot of free stuff. And then if you're in any of the small business centers at the community colleges, we teach a lot of seminars on board development there, and you can attend those for free. So small business centers offer those around the state. So how do you acquire fundraising for staff professional development? I'm going to let Marie talk about that for a second, but there's also a lot of verbiage that you can do as you do grant research. So you can look for capacity building grants, obviously general operating grants. There's some professional development grants available, and so it depends on what you're trying to do. You might also find program or project specific grants depending on the area that you're working in that will help you find those dollars. I think Marie has something to add to that.
Yes, almost all of your questions, which are great, by the way, are entire webinars or workshops that we do offer. But to tie it back into the impact, since that's the conversation for today, if you go to the local bank or Walmart Foundation or some of them and say, we want to get development dollars, you might get rejected unless you can show the impact of that. So for example, I did a small grant for program development for STEM, and I said our staff archaeologist, her ability to continue to be innovative in the field is dependent upon her interaction with other professionals who are sharing those ideas, and we would like to request 20% of the cost of her travel to go to SEAC, like the Southeast Regional Archaeology Conference, and we actually got funded for some of that through the grants. So I wouldn't put 100% of that in necessarily a program grant, because they feel like you should have professional staff in place. But it's certainly, as Mandy said, think about everything that goes into the program. And if your staff development is a key portion of that, then do that. If you're writing state and federal grants, that will generally allow 5 to 10% of your administrative overhead in it. But once again, what is the development you're wanting to do? What is the impact that you're going to have on your organization? I was working with an organization yesterday that wants to hire a consultant to do specific work, and they are going to approach 10 of their largest donors for a restricted gift and say, this is what we want to do to add to our development. We want to offer these workshops and trainings. Would you come in as a leader in this project so that the rest of our group does not feel like we're taking from general ops or program monies? Paige has asked, we have lots of statistics regarding actual numbers of food, boxes, meals, people fed per month, awesome, but little info about direct social impact that is truly trackable. What are possible ways of approaching a wider view of this to express impact? Great question, Paige. We were working with a group in the western portion of the state last month, I believe, that addresses food disparities, and we focused on a couple different things. One is, what is the impact your organization is having? And then you might create a questionnaire or a conversation with your local social services, local government organizations to see how are the services you providing supporting them? What would they see? Let's just ask this magic question. If your organization were to disappear this year, how would that impact the community? And more than likely, that's going to be a black picture. It should be. If you're doing great work, then your absence would create a huge void. If you go to your community partners and say, imagine tomorrow our doors close, how would that impact our community? How would it impact the services you give? Tell us what the community will look like without us, and get someone else's response. I can tell you why my organization is fabulous, but hearing the director of social services or the local police department or the local superintendent say that about the organization is that much more impactful. The other thing is ask the opposite question. We asked earlier, all impact statements should answer the question, so what? So if you disappear tomorrow, so what? What's going to happen? Paint that black picture. If you are fully funded in your programs and your general ops, then so what? What could you accomplish? And that picture should be a very positive picture. And once again, feedback from the community organizations like, hey, if we could help you do X, Y, or Z, how would that change the community? There are lots of great resources and studies. For some things, I use Pew Research. We use lots of different national evidence-based studies that focus on food disparities, health and nutrition. I would look at those. When we were working with this client last month, we actually pulled out kind of the impacts of hunger on educational and social development, things like that. There are studies available. So hopefully impact. There are resources available for that. And then we have another question. You touched on this, but how powerful is it, and what is the best way to use published studies done at similar organizations, therapeutic writing centers in other parts of the country, about the effectiveness of the programs you share in common? That's once again back to the evidence-based. So especially if you don't have a history of success, you're new starting out, you want to tell people why you believe you're going to be successful. So if you have a program model that someone else has implemented successfully in a community of the similar size, similar demographics, with similar capabilities, qualifications, and resources, it would be reasonable to expect that you could expect the same results, right? So using examples of what other people have accomplished brings it closer to home, perhaps, instead of just a study. Say, studies indicate, and we are inspired by a similar organization in X county or X part of this country that has done this, and we look forward to accomplishing or achieving the same success. So absolutely, if it helps you paint a picture, use it as an impact statement.
Great questions, guys. Jeanette, do you have any other questions? I think we've answered all the chats and all the Q&As at this point.
That is all for me, and I so appreciate this webinar. Y'all given us so much information to chew on and take back, and having the slides afterwards I think will be a big help for all of us who want to take those visuals and see how we can recreate them for our organization. So thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Really
if anybody has any questions directly for us, you can always email us, Mandy or Marie at fundingforgood.org, and we really appreciate you having us on today. This has been great.
Well, thank you. And also want to thank the Pathways funders, which you'll see all of their logos right there on the final slide. We couldn't do this without them. They fund this type of workshop and work. So if you are working with any of those funders, please say thank you to them for their commitment to capacity building, because they really make this happen. And thank you everyone who joined us. Again, barring any technical difficulties, we will post the recording of the webinar on our website later on this afternoon, hopefully, or in the morning at the latest. And you'll receive a link from us with the survey. So please take a moment and fill that out for us and give us some feedback and let us know what else you'd like to learn about, and we'll get some good programming together for you. We do have one more webinar coming up in June, and that one is with Lakeisha McDay, who is the Director of Diversity and Inclusion at Mission Hospital. The topic of that is a human resource related topic called Transforming the Workplace Through Equity, Inclusion, and Diversity. And it's going to be a great workshop on looking at our hiring practices, looking at our onboarding practices, looking at how do we recruit for our executive board members and our board members to increase diversity and ultimately increase equity and inclusion in our organization. So you'll be receiving a link to join that in one of our upcoming e-news issues. So please join us for that. And thank you everyone for being here today. Have a wonderful day, and we'll talk to you soon.